And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored in part by Allison Cook, Super Infra Man, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so much for your support. And if you want to become a patron and help support Where Did the Road Go, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month. You get extra content all month. You can also support the show through donations off the website or pick up some merch. All available at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am joined by Red Pill Junkie.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Christopher Ernst.
Hello, good sirs.
And Super Infra Man.
Hello, hello.
Also known as Saxon.
Also known as Saxon.
So this is just Red Pill wants to do a show, so we're going to do a show.
Red Pill is depressed.
So hopefully this will cheer Red Pill up because I always like talking to you guys, so I was fine with the idea.
Same here.
And part of why Red Pill's depressed is there's not a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that aside from billionaires going to space, there's an all hell breaking loose with regards to climate change and floods and what have you.
Yeah.
And record heat in the United States. There's not a lot going on, I think.
It's true.
And you had mentioned that UFO Twitter kind of got quiet after the news conference last month.
Yeah, it's my own personal bias, the subjective impression that after the preliminary report was released, everything got very quiet on the UFO front. Even if you go and do a search on Google Trends and use the word UFO or UAP, whatever floats your boat, you will see a very discernible peak, and then after that the search or the term plummets in online interaction.
Yeah. Well, because there wasn't really much to go on. They basically gave us the same thing that they gave us with Project Blue Book, except now in 2021.
Yeah, I said in an online interaction on Twitter that to me, the report was the equivalent of the blue dress, yellow dress paradox. It was so ambiguous that anyone could interpret it any way you wanted, depending on your expectations. People were skeptical about the possibility that some of those UFO encounters that were analyzed by the UAP task force, that some of those might have been something truly anomalous, truly exotic. People who are questioned that, like Mick West and all those skeptics, they had, there were paragraphs that left them satisfied. That said, they couldn't discount the possibility that of spoofing, the radar systems, or maybe even the malfunctioning of the radar systems. And this is something that at first I didn't pick it up. And then I was forced to reread it again because Mick West said, well, it's literally in the first page. He was right. In the first page, they left it out. But also on the first page, and this is for the people who were still hopeful, that the task force was going to go the alien route, which they didn't, but they kind of leave the door open, saying, there was a couple of those, of those cases which seem to show very interesting characteristics and physical capabilities that were way beyond America's military aircraft.
Mhm.
So it was like I kind of feel like these guys, whoever they were, the ones who were in charge of writing this thing, which, by the way, everybody, even Tim Vinod was saying, "Oh, I mean, I hope this thing is not like 50 pages because I don't want to waste all my weekend reading this stuff." No, it was only 9 pages, and if you took out the front page and the index, it was 7 pages, 7 miserable pages. And some people say that I just read on Twitter, I think that John Greenwald Jr. from the Black Bolt says he has confirmed that the actual classified report, the one that we didn't get to see, is 17 pages. So just twice as long. So
Wow.
So you have a very, very short document, and I get the feeling that these guys, after drinking God knows how many pots of coffee, and say, "Okay, man, how are we gonna do this thing?" Let's try to leave everybody satisfied. Let's just do the minimum requirement. What is mandatory for us to fulfill by law, and that'll be the end of it. And I feel that's what they did. Now, some people say that there's, this is not the final word. There is going to be another report in 90 days or something. I don't know. And there are people who say that, behind the scenes in Washington, there are people who did take this report very seriously, and that the wheels are moving. To what end? I guess, give these guys more money.
Yeah.
And have a bigger office with another printer and another file cabinet, and
Right.
that. What else are you going to do? I mean, they didn't provide any kind of evidence or data, something that you could show to a skeptic like Midwest, who has a right to, let's be honest, has a right to demand compelling evidence, which he hasn't been shown. Okay, aside from the testimony of the pilots, David Fravor, Alex Dietrich, all the people who have come forward, who I think everybody here finds him highly credible.
Yes.
But aside from that, the report didn't provide anything else. There weren't any photos or videos. All these videos that this 23-minute video that Elizondo claims that was showing something taken from a distance of 50 feet. You could see the mating Zeta Reticula, label in the goddamn. I don't.
Right.
But obviously we weren't shown that, and they haven't shown any other sensory data that was allegedly gathered during all these incursions. And I don't know, are they going to? How? This is my legitimate question. How are they going to enroll the participation of civilian scientists in trying to solve this thing? Because they clearly haven't. They clearly are still scratching their heads, saying we really don't know what's going on. And Elizondo allegedly says that Elizondo says that the reason why he quit, the Pentagon quit ATIP and went with Tom DeLonge is because he and Mellon were trying to get the participation of the public. They wanted to get the public interested, which they did. Well, that's not enough. They also need to get the participation of and get the academic and the scientific community involved in this.
Right.
And they have failed, in my opinion, they have failed miserably because they haven't given or shown the goods. And I don't see the Pentagon willing to do so, willing to say, well, whoever wants to, help us out with here, you probably will need to sign some documents, because we're going to show you classified information, yada, yada, yada. But please, help us out here. No, they're still keeping all those videos and all that radar data. They're keeping all that info still locked.
Yep. Sure.
And some file cabinets or whatever. So I don't know. It feels like a stalemate, and I feel this is my fear. We have seen this before. I feel that the public will soon, slowly but surely, lose interest and move on from the UFO topic again. Agreed.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I agree, and I'm afraid that's already happening too. Red Pill. There's a way of looking at this where they handled it from the Pentagon side so pedestrianly. I think I'm saying that right way, but with such a pedestrian, dull approach, it took all of the pizzazz out of it, the mystery out of it, and then you cap it off with the report that falls completely flat. And I don't know if that wasn't by design. It kind of feels like that in a certain way. Like, well, how do we just say like, oh, sure, there's some stuff we don't know what they are, even though it's probably our stuff, and then we move on and we don't say anything again. Like, that's kind of the whole feel I get out of it. And I think our best bet is along this topic is if something else gets leaked and gets people curious again, but otherwise,
right.
The Pentagon is its own world. They don't really answer to anybody. Sure, they can kind of get strong-armed into making a 7-page or 17-page report, but it's the bare minimum, and everybody just accepts what they put out. So
yes, yeah. Well, so we were also talking about like the potential for this to have been or I brought it up that this could be a way of them getting more money to militarize space. And Chris, you started talking about the fact that we haven't gone back to the moon. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Right. Well, I mean, my thought about that is that, this whole idea that if this is all to try to raise money to sort of support the Space Force, which I still believe, and I could be wrong, that they are under the aegis of the Air Force. So they aren't even yet a completely separate branch. They're still underneath the umbrella of the Air Force. Not that it necessarily makes any difference, but in terms, I guess, of like their funding and the scope of stuff that they would have, I think that something to keep in mind. Like, it's not like they're an entire branch. So what are they there for? We haven't really punched that far into space. I mean, honestly, and I think that, there certainly are some skeptical, arguments as to why we haven't gone back to the moon for certain particular reasons, so on and so forth. And yeah, I mean, that all very well might be true, but at the end of the day, we haven't gone back. We don't have anybody in Mars yet. Even these billionaires that are doing stuff aren't actually going to space. I mean, Branson didn't actually go to space. And until Elon has his mansion on Mars, I'm pretty skeptical. So that being said, we've barely, as far as we know, and this is not including any sort of like Richard Dolan, secret space program, breakaway civilization things, which, that's a whole other, ball of wax. But if what we see is what we got, even if we have even more than we see, we haven't really broken any further than the moon, or much further than that. And so what is there for us to fight about? Well, we're fighting about satellite information. Honestly, we're fighting about the eyes in the sky.
Yeah.
Like there isn't real estate. It's the control of, this space that allows information. Maybe at some point there'll be some sort of Elysium type, space station where the 1% can go and live. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that would be luxurious enough for them with what the technology we got right now, unless there's a breakaway civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which you can't completely rule out because we wouldn't know about it.
Right.
And why
Would
do
be
you,
a big. Go ahead.
why do you guys think we haven't gone back to the moon?
Personally, I think because it's so freaking hard to keep frail human beings alive in the most dangerous environment that we know of, which is the environment outside the protective cocoon of our home planet.
And our magnetic field, yes.
And our magnetic fields, even being outside of Earth's gravity pool takes a heavy toll on our bodies because our bodies were designed to be always under the effect of the 1G acceleration. And astronauts on the International Space Stations, they have to keep a very, very strict regimen in order not to have their bones turn into goo.
Yeah.
There was a very brilliant Twitter thread that I retweeted that happened like the day after Branson and Virgin Galactic had their maiden voyage. And this is from, I think it was the spouse of a NASA flight controller. And it was a brilliant exposition of why all these Elysium type utopias, the idea that, the billionaires are ready to flee from this burning planet, this planet that has gone to hell, and they're going to flee, and they're going to go to Mars, and they're going to abandon us. And it was a very brilliant exposition of why this isn't the case at all. Not at least for Musk, Bezos, and Branson, and all these guys. Not in the least for the next, 100 years, because the amount of effort that it takes to keep the astronauts in the International Space Stations alive, every time that something breaks down in the station, which inevitably it happens, like all the time, and all the team of engineers, they frantically need to go and try to solve the issue. Not to mention that the station needs to be on a constant schedule of resupplying of things, like bare necessities like air, and water, and not to mention the food, which, by the way, it's also it's still terrible, and the astronauts, they're suffering from constipation because the space food is terrible for their innards, and also the fact that the way that you have to go and take a dump in space, it's so complicated. So and this is just for something that is orbiting our planet, that is barely out there. And now the moon, which is 350,000 kilometers away, which is considerable. I think it's I think one time I read that if we could fit all the planets in the solar system between the distance between the Earth and the moon, which is like, I was amazed. Like, are you kidding me?
That doesn't
really gives you a perspective,
That doesn't seem right.
Well, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I read it on the internet, so it must be right. Or maybe I read it wrong. Someone could fact check it right now as I keep speaking. But anyway, I mean, even if that is not correct, it's still, the moon is very, very far away. And unless I think we manage to get more advanced robotic systems that could help would be permanent lunar colony to do the most menial tasks of, constructing and preserving the habitats and do basic repairs, whatever. And not to mention the improvements in propulsion and all that. So sending a kilogram of material to a lunar colony is not so freakingly expensive, unless we manage to solve all this. It's still going to be a pipe dream, and not to mention that right now, and maybe it was the same in the 1960s. I don't know. Right now, I don't see a lot of support for the idea of space exploration. Like, I saw. I mean, I didn't see a lot. Maybe this is something of my time, my Twitter, the way that I have designed it. But I didn't see a lot of support for Branson. What I see, it was people retweeting or posting that famous poem from the 1960s, like Whitey is on the moon.
Yeah,
like saying Whitey is on suborbit. Like saying, the world is on fire, and these guys could be using their obscene wealth in order to solve things like world hunger or whatever. But no, instead they are just trying to have these competition between each other to see who gets the bigger rocket and who gets to have the bigger thrill in outer space, and who gets to feel like Buzz Lightyear or Captain Kirk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just did the math, and you are absolutely correct, RV. Red Pill.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking that Jupiter alone would knock that out, but it's like 238,000 miles to the moon, and I think I just added up roughly what the planets are, and it came to about 200,000.
Yep. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And our magnetic field still extends to that, so we really haven't seen like the tail of it. We really haven't seen how humans deal with long-term extended travel outside of essentially our little Gaia bubble. And I know it sounds a little, woo-woo there, but that's essentially the idea, whether or not you want to think of it from a spiritual or subtle level, you want to think of it from a purely, physical level in terms of like the electromagnetics, sphere and the, our biome or whatever. We don't know. And there's, I think, and I could be wrong, that I'm now just sort of like imagining articles that I probably read where I believe that, they're aware of this. This isn't something that, they're not aware of. Obviously, they talk about, if you go to the NASA website, the major thing they talk about in terms of actual physical effects is radiation, which is still a thing. It's getting beyond the Van Allen belt. Is that what is that? Am I saying that right? Yeah. Okay. But it's, I'd be really curious to see, once we really get out there, is this, are we going to become, space corpses, or is this going to be a Fantastic Four type situation where the cosmic rays turn you into the thing?
Maybe all the above.
Maybe all the above, or maybe just cancer.
Or just cancer. Yeah. I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Okay. What you're talking about and what Red Pill's talking about too, I think is what's affected us in the space program up until now anyway. When you stop production of something that's so massive and it has to have so many particular types of systems to support a person to live long enough, go around the moon, it costs so much money to revive that too.
Yeah.
So once we stopped going, it wasn't like we could rev it back up in 5 years. It was going to take moving mountains to do these kinds of things.
For sure.
And, and of course, all these guys that are building rockets and things are really thinking about military applications and military contracts. Don't buy the this is for the good of humanity thing. But even the stuff that they're putting together, at least right now, does not have the complexity in the size needed to get to the moon or beyond that yet. It's very interesting to watch some of this stuff sort of trickle out. You know, we were talking about Space Force, and Chris, you had mentioned drones and satellites, and I agree with you 100% on that. And that's where the X-37 comes in. If y'all remember the drone space plane that will go on like 2-year missions. And I understand there's 2 of those, if I'm remembering correctly. Both part of the Air Force, part of Space Force. I do think, and I mentioned this before we started recording, that we've had some type of space plane that was a precursor to Branson's low orbit plane.
Yeah.
There were a lot of designs that look like stuff that Burt Rutan designed. There's a lot of his hallmarks of like the canard on the front of the plane, the rudders on the wingtips as opposed to in the middle. And there's a patent out there floating around that is basically the same concept as Branson space plane that Burt Rutan designed. And it also has a little bit of look of like the Valkyrie aircraft that preceded the Oxcart spy plane. And I'm sure that got built at some point and was used. And then as time has gone on, we've seen that proof of concept trickle back into the public domain. And that's why you get Branson flying into space and not space, which I think is appropriate to point out because it's just upper atmosphere where you can be a little weightless for a while. But and nobody cares, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a rant.
No. I mean, we're all ranting. There was this Netflix TV series with Hilary Swank about the first Mars mission, which was a joint venture between the United States, the European Space Agency, Russia, and also China.
Right.
And I really feel that's the only way in which humans will be able to actually go up there, you know, go to the moon, go to Mars. This idea of countries trying alone to reinvent the wheel every time and do everything all by themselves, it feels so futile.
Yeah.
It feels like, nah, this ain't Gene Roddenberry's dream, man. And by the way, it's so ironic to me that all these billionaires were influenced and inspired by Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. They failed to remember that that future that this guy envisioned is a totally post-capitalist.
Yeah, it's post-scarcity completely.
It's post-capitalism. You know, there's one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation is in which they find this probe with 3 people that were like frozen, you know, with cryonics from the 20th century. And one of them was a banker, and the first thing he said, "I need to talk to my lawyer." Captain Picard said, "Well, your lawyer has been dead for the last 200 years." "Well, I'm sure his firm still managed to survive. I need to check on my bank account." He said, "Yeah, we don't use that anymore, dude. We don't work for money."
Imagine.
What?
So let me bring this up then. I mean, there are obviously people out there who think that we never went to the moon. Now, with the weirdness of the movie there, The Shining, and all the little nods, what do you guys make of that?
So I think we went, but I did hear an interesting comment last year. It was a friend of mine that believed that we did go to the moon, but the footage that we see actually was recorded by Kubrick.
And that's one of my pet theories.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's a lot to that makes sense just in terms of, you know, like and I don't have the knowledge or background to verify any of this or make these claims, but just the fidelity of the recordings and, beaming things back to Earth and what have you, that would be very hard to do. But if you filmed it in a studio, you've got the recording, you can play it live on TV after the delay, of course, that's supposed to take place between something getting from the moon to here, which I forget how long that was supposed to be during the moon landings. But anyway, there's a lot of logic to that, whether or not it's true. That's something that I lean into as well now.
Or it's also possible that they filmed it and we saw a mix of real and not real because they didn't want to give the tech away by putting it on video.
That's true. Yeah.
Or they filmed it in case it failed because that way it didn't fail.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was the time in between? I can't remember off the top of my head because it wasn't broadcast. A lot of people were under this like false assumption, like I think that weren't there, that it was visually broadcast, which it wasn't. We heard a radio, like that's what was broadcast was audio. Does anybody remember when they first publicly released the footage? How, like,
I'm
in between?
it up.
No.
I'm glad you said that because I thought they had actually not necessarily live, but essentially tried to beam it back to Earth in some form.
Yeah, I was also under that same impression.
I don't think they did.
A 30-second delay, or some kind of delay between relaying the signal that was sent from the cameras and in the lunar lander to NBC or whatever it was, whatever.
So
maybe I'm wrong. Okay, all right.
The moon landing was one of the biggest television events in history, reaching an estimated 650 million viewers. Yeah, so it looks like it was beamed semi-live.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong then. Yeah, I guess I am wrong. I would think there would be an enormous delay. I mean, I'm sure there was.
Yeah. It was, I think it was like a 90-second delay, because I think that there were several stations. I think one was even in the Canary Island. There's so many conspiracy theories about the moon in the United States. There's another conspiracy theory that is not very known in the United States that originated in Spain about this American engineer that says that he worked on the Canary Island relay station, and that he heard something that was then censored or something, like the typical idea of Neil Armstrong saying, "Oh my God, what is that?" And that was the thing was cut off from the televised transmission, which is always fun. No? The idea of Armstrong and Aldrin, almost like in the Transformers movie, seeing something that and that is what NASA censored because they don't want us to know the truth.
Right.
That is what some of my favorite conspiracy theories about the moon. Not the idea that we didn't go or that they Kubrik pre-recorded. The idea that they did go and they saw something that was the thing that was doctored out of NASA.
Well, that's some of the stories about that are they see people over the ridge. They see something over the ridge. There's like a ridge. Something like, I see these babies, they're huge, or something like that, I think is one of the reported transmissions. And then there's this is Hoagland's whole thing about like the glass, right? Yeah. Like how there's like these glass domes, and if you look at the different photographs, you can see the way that, these structures are. Yeah.
And the photography quality is not so great that you can definitively say that. I see what he's looking at, but it's almost like, is this just because the photo quality is so bad?
Right. I think there are artifacts.
I am not that theory of Hoagland's is not one that resonates with me, but I agree with you, RPJ. The the mythos of them arriving and there being something that had to be cut out, you know, and that's the reason why we didn't go back. I'm, you know, I like that very much. And it also, you know, Penetration by Ingo Swann is one of my favorite, like, pulp, you know, psychic books. And I love the stuff, you know, how he kind of presents that idea of, we've talked about this, I think, a bunch of times on the show, you know, where he's remote viewing the moon and he sees, you know, these essentially on the dark side of the moon, these structures that, you know, humanoid creatures are building, and they see him, you know, and so he blips back out.
Yeah. Plus, you can go to the internet right now and search all these videos that supposedly are from the other Apollo missions that were secret. You know, when they found structures on the moon. I also found this kind of like giant, super old alien spacecraft, and inside the spacecraft there was this mummy of a woman that they call the Mona Lisa, and 95%, 99% that these are fake. But the idea that the alien had Asian type features,
it did,
you know, like slanted eyes and all of that, I found that to be so interesting because it coincides with so many close encounter accounts with people with that see humanoid type UFOnauts, and they say, well, they look like human beings, but and they had long hair, but their eyes were bigger and they were slanted as if they were well, I hope people forgive me, I'm trying not to be racist, as if they were Chinese or something.
Sure, the different sort of epithelial folds that
and that is
Keel talks about that.
20, right?
Keel talks about that a lot. So
you know, that was even some descriptions of like some of the Men in Black were related that same way too.
Had sort of an a darker skin and an Asian countenance.
Right. Olive skin. Something that's really like, wow, that's interesting.
I will say one thing that it always tickles me too, like, because who knows what went on during the period that there was that stretch, I believe, where they lost contact because of the rotation of the Earth or something. And I'm sure they saw some things up there, but Neil Armstrong, if you ever read about that guy or hear any stories about him, was so icy calm all the time. He kind of reminds me of the guy that did the free solo, you know, would climb without all the climbing gear, these places that were supposed to be impossible to climb, because he doesn't really sense fear, like clinically he doesn't. There was a story, you guys have probably all seen the old film footage of like the little hover chair that they were trying to sit in the middle of and testing and things like that. Just one of those early kind of wonky, you know, 1960s test platforms. Neil was piloting that when it crashed. And he ejected from it. It crashed, destroyed the whole thing. Lots of fire, things like that. And he was fine. And I can't remember who it was that walked into the office later that day and was like, "Oh, hey, Neil, how's it going?" Neil's like, "Oh, hey, good." And the guy that walked into the office didn't find out for like 2 more days that Neil had ejected and almost died in this thing. And it completely unfazed Neil. He's just, he was really made out of something else.
Right. Well, that's something that Kubrick also was very almost prophetic about. You know, the idea of in his 2001 Space Odyssey, which was actually released a year before the Apollo landing, they both banned the astronauts, and the other one, who was another Paul. They were so ice-like, and they were so almost devoid of emotions, to the point that it becomes ironic that the computer HAL seems to elicit more emotion than the human astronauts that are going on to the mission. So interesting, and also obviously the idea that Neil Armstrong became almost like a hermit after the Apollo landing. Some people say, well, obviously understandable. He became the most famous man, not only in the world, but maybe almost in all of history. Like, of all the people that have ever lived, he was the first to set foot on another world, and that's big. That's we see like someone who wins, some TV show, whatever, and they became accosted by paparazzis. Imagine this guy, I mean, so no wonder he became a recluse. But also there's the idea that, but also that what they saw on the moon, and how they had to, keep silent. That was the reason why he became such a recluse. But I guess we'll never know.
Right.
Yeah.
I was always conflicted about him being more withdrawn from the public, because if there was ever somebody that you would want to be an advocate for continuing to explore space, it should have been Neil Armstrong. Yeah. But I assume he felt like he had a duty to do there or something like that. As part of the reason that he stepped back, because I also think if they had asked him to be more out front, he would have done it. But he didn't see that as his job, or they asked him not to.
Or maybe he didn't want to. The guy, let's be honest, if the guy had said, you know what, I'm going to run for president, he would have won. He would have won, no questions asked. He would have at least become a senator,
Mm-hmm.
But I guess he wasn't Indian, he was a pilot, he was an engineer, and then after he, I guess he said, I'll never do something as big as this. So, there's nothing else but to, live the rest of my life quietly.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't he also the one that reported seeing UFOs when they were up there? Was it him or one of the other astronauts? Huh?
Is it him? Gordon Cooper?
Lately, Buzz Aldrin.
That's who it was.
That has acknowledged that they did see something weird en route to the moon.
Yes. Okay.
And it was even portrayed in this National Geographic miniseries about the Apollo mission, which was weird. You see that in that it is a very short scene in which they see something they cannot explain, and Buzz Aldrin says, are we not going to report that the UFO is following us? And the other two says, yeah, but if we do you imagine if they tell us that we need to go back? The mission is canceled. No, we can't do that. So that's why that's Aldrin's rationale behind why they didn't actually say something, to mission control, saying, hey, we are seeing this anomalous phenomenon we can't explain. And also he is not, you listen to him and he says, well, maybe it was, some part of the booster or whatever that was catching sunlight in reflecting in some weird way. It certainly doesn't seem as if it was a UFO that was behaving in a very particularly interesting way. So, but that's the thing.
Gotcha. So we mentioned Hoagland, and I mean, when Hoagland came out with the Mars stuff, some of that was very interesting. But then it seems like he just made this decline into everything's fake, everything's artificial. It's like anywhere he looked in the solar system, it's like this is artificial, and so is this, and this, and this. And it's kind of like, okay, what's going on here? Do you really believe this, or is this just how you sell books?
Yeah.
Because honestly, the stuff at Sedona is very weird. It does look like actual structures, and even with the updated photography, I mean, he had a very good article. Because he was trying to get the raw footage of the face, and they wouldn't release it. And so finally they released it after they had filtered it through all these filters. And so he took a normal photograph of a human face and ran them through the same filters, and it just looked like a splotch. So
no, I think that early stuff, I mean, the stuff of the Sidonia stuff I do find interesting, but I agree with you. I feel like in his research, he started to, kind of see it everywhere. Like those, the lava tube stuff. That's not something that, you guys know what I'm talking about? Those basically look like, I mean, they could be numerous geological things. And I'm saying that just, being a complete idiot and not knowing anything about it. But it just seems to me like, he's seeing stuff where there isn't stuff, which I think is part of the, I don't want to say this, I'll say this and it being sort of Fordiana, but anything that is, uncanny or weird with a capital W, it's very easy to go down that path, where there's some real and some not. So I don't necessarily blame him. Like, I don't think that means that his early stuff with Sidonia is, bunk. If other stuff is, he
called them like glass worms, I think. Is that right?
I remember that.
Yeah. The face is fascinating to me too, and this goes back to stuff I always bugged Chris about with the comic book connection on this. Jack Kirby did a story about astronauts going to Mars to see a face on Mars. Like
he did,
right? It was a couple of months before.
Oh yeah,
the the face on Mars photograph was taken. And he also did a great version of 2001, by the way, but that's another story.
Well, not only that, but one of the things Hoagland jumped on as being artificial or proving some sort of secret knowledge was the moon there of Saturn that looks damn close to the Death Star.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, so did Lucas somehow intuit this? Is it just coincidence? Because, man, that really does look weird.
Yeah.
I mean, if Lucas is an interesting guy when you look at him from a filmmaking perspective. This is something I can talk about with authority. I teach this in one of my classes. He was really interested in a lot more esoteric or at least metaphysical filmmaking art before he ended up making American Graffiti. Like a lot of the stuff that he was doing at USC was this real tone poem type stuff. So he'd be talking about like spirituality, life, death, existence stuff. And he actually got the term "the Force" from this film by a Canadian filmmaker who made this. It's like almost like a experimental documentary from the 50s, and it's essentially like a bunch of footage of like, sort of regular people going about their everyday life, but then like different types of spiritual practices. So like it's some footage of like, snake wrangling churches in the South and, all this other stuff. It's a experimental kind of documentary type film, almost like a collage of stuff. But in some of the voiceovers, there's somebody talking about in the very real context of like, the Akashic field, they talk about the Force. And it's, I think, this quote that says, what if there was a force that, exists all around us that's invisible but binds us all together? And so I very much think in the same way that I feel like certain, artists are tapping into the muses, which I also think is the same thing as, tapping into the other side or something out there, I would very much believe that he would be the type of person that in his films you would see that kind of prognostication. It doesn't surprise me, because I think that especially with Star Wars, the way that he was setting it up, even though it didn't turn into this, he was trying to make this very like he was trying to use the model or like of a pulp serial sci-fi like Flash Gordon type thing as like the mask for a much deeper metaphysical treatise, where he was actually using this thing called a chiastic structure, where it's like It's the same type of thing you hear in like poetry or verse, where it's like a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. There's this like ABBA thing. And you can go and look online. There's actually this guy that has a whole website devoted to it called the Star Wars Ring Cycle, Ring Theory. Oh. And he talks about this in terms of matching, shots and stuff like that. But I think that Lucas is, secretly very much an esoteric artist and filmmaker. So I believe that, seeing stuff in his films makes a lot of sense, on top of, how it's influenced us culturally. I mean,
right.
Which is huge.
But the original Star Wars movie was supposed to be a one-off too.
I don't know if it was. From what I know, there are a couple of interviews where he was talking about it as like a larger piece, but maybe it changed. I don't know. It could have been that it was at one point, or that's how he was putting it out. The articles that I use, he's talking about them, and this might be something he's done. Like he was doing. I forget if the interviews are like Empire or Jedi era, in which case, he could say whatever he wants, but he's talking about it in terms of wanting to put together this sort of like, this larger poetic piece.
Well, I think I looked this up before, and when Star Wars came out, that was it. It was just Star Wars. It was not part 4. It was not anything. And then when it was hugely successful, he then said, well, it's a 9-part series, and this is part 4. And then it got tagged with A New Hope.
Well, he might have had that like in his back pocket, or maybe not. Maybe he put it together afterwards. No, I totally believe you that you're probably right about that.
And if you watch Star Wars, it's the hero's journey, and
completely,
it's
complete.
Joseph
Campbell,
and it ends. There's no continuation there.
Yeah,
that's the entire thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole part about the chiastic structure, is that it's like nested structures. So you actually have this like smaller hero's journey, but then the larger hero's journey too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Also, I don't think that many people are aware of how much Lucas borrowed from Frank Herbert's
yes.
Oh yeah.
Going from the location, Tatooine is basically Arrakis, a desert planet. I guess it is the quintessential background for a mystical experience. When you want to have the illumination, you become a hermit and you go like Ben Kenobi, who go and live in a cave in the desert, like so many Christian saints from the first century in Egypt and whatever. But yeah, there are other things, and I'm one of the things that I'm looking forward this year is seeing this new adaptation of Dune, which looks very promising. I'm trying not to raise my hopes too much. But I think that it's going to be interesting, and say that it's going to be dark because the books are very dark. Sometimes are very like the heroes become the villains very quickly. Very very quickly. It will be interesting to see how, and also the idea that this book arrives at such a particular point in our culture, it's this zeitgeist, because they deal so much with concepts of ecology and preservation of the environment, and how the environment shapes civilization and shapes people, and vice versa. And now that we are seeing such, the climate change wreaking havoc in our world so drastically, remember when 30 years ago people were still saying, oh yeah, climate change is going to happen, but it's like centuries ahead, we'll be fine. It's our grandchildren who will have to do something about it. Guess what, bitch? It is you who is going to suffer from it. And forget about your great-great-grandchildren. You ain't having great-great-grandchildren because of this.
So my favorite thing lately, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but there was a tweet it may have been about the fire in the Gulf with the underground gas pipeline that ruptured, but the guy was like, Sorry, guys, I forgot to recycle this week. This one's on me.
Yeah, exactly.
The other comment I was going to make about Lucas, not only did he borrow from a lot of other sources, but so initially it was supposed to just be Star Wars, then it was going to be a 9-part thing. And then, despite having said this numerous times, he then tried to deny that he ever said it was going to be 9 parts and that he only planned 6 parts. And it's like, but there's all this video of you saying that. Do you not remember, or do you just lie because you can, you know?
I don't know. I think he had I think he had something in mind, but I very much, you know, and this is I have nothing to base this on, but I feel like Hollywood kind of killed him. Like he was just, you know, he was like a sensitive, weird guy. And I think that, you know, whatever he went through, and I'm not saying that, you know, ooh, poor him, billions of dollars or whatever. Right. But, you know, I think this is a perfect example of, like, you know, weirdness and money have allowed him to live in his own completely isolated echo chamber. So I bet you he doesn't even know I bet you he might not even remember like what he thinks, or he might, you know, rewrite his own history depending upon what he said, and nobody's going to say no to him.
Yeah, that could be
right. You could see the evolution of some of his ideas, like when he makes the first references to the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
You know, it was more like the implication that Obi-Wan, you know, literally being 0B-1.
Yeah.
You know, and Lando was even going to be a clone at one point, things like that. And obviously that's changed over the years. So there was a lot of evolution to what he had planned out.
Sure.
And of course I, you know, all of us, I'm a huge fan of the original movies. The other ones are good, but those are the ones I grew up with. I had the tapes and I watched them every day, just about, because we didn't have cable.
Right.
But, you know, all of the imaginings of what was going on before and after with Star Wars, and which was in those 3 movies, of what the Jedi were like, and this idea that there were going to be a whole lot of Jedi and a whole lot of Sith fighting each other in the past, and the prequels, if they ever made them, and there were clones of the Jedi and they had to fight each other, and then, you know, there's the rule of 2, and that just killed me.
Well, I mean, I almost feel like, you know, it's something that I think happens to artists, you know, that, you know, he had this, it was almost like, you know, he had something that was, I don't want to say pure, but it was like, I do believe very much in, you know, the muse to some degree, speaking through people, and that, you know, he was onto something. And I think that in the first few, you know, Star Wars, you know, particularly even in the first one, and this has completely, you know, nothing to do with like the filmmaking quality of it, but like I think a lot of the themes there still have this flavor of myth and you know, mystery and occulted knowledge, and that's something that, you know, and I think we can see this mirrored in culture, you know, too, or in the way that we look at things that are preternatural. You look at the prequels, and, you know, at that point, he kind of explained everything away. Oh, it's not this mythic thing that we can't really put our finger on called the Force. It's midichlorians. Right. It's these little tiny robots, or not little tiny, you know, organisms or something. So you're getting into this very material, you know, physical type of scientism. And I think that, you know, for me at least, that was a big part of why I didn't like the prequels, is that they were missing, even if, you know, these were shoddier movies that were corny, the first 3 had that air of mystery and myth that I think is really important to for me at least.
You know,
also,
I agree.
The fact that I mean, the first movies were so fearless. You know, this is like the first. Well, wasn't his first movie? Obviously, he was by a long shot, but like he was fearless. Like his main goal was to tell the story, try to tell it as best as possible, and that was it. And later you can clearly see how instead of a story, what he's trying to do is sell a product.
Yes.
You know, the movies became so huge.
Yeah.
And this is why, you know, one of the main examples, or one of the best examples of why artists become terrible, you know, businessmen. and George Lucas became a businessman, became the handler of a multi-billion-dollar empire, and I'm sure that there were many decisions in the scripts of the prequels and the others in which taking care of the franchise was more important than actually telling the story. Like but if we do this, we're not going to sell as many, you know, toys in the next Christmas, you know. So what can you just, you know, change this a little bit? So it's like, and this is, you know, one of the reasons why. I mean, the first movies, they were so like they were for children, but there were things that were totally not for children, like Obi-Wan, you know, chopping off the arm of a guy in a cantina brawl. Like, what? You know, even if they don't show it, but it's and even in the second one, you know, like Darth Vader chopping the hand of Luke, it's like, wow, man. And in the other ones, it's so like safe for little children, and you have the goddamn Jar Jar Binks talking like, fuck yourself. It's like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, yeah, I know you want to have the bigger audience because those are the children that are going to beg their parents to buy all the toys and the lunch boxes or whatever. But I think that's what began to ruin the Star Wars universe. You know, all these business-like decisions. And now I'm seeing that there are people like Jon Favreau that are trying to say, no. First and foremost, we're going to tell a story, and we're going to tell it very well. And now they're doing shows like The Mandalorian, which I absolutely love. I think that it is. I think that The Mandalorian is the best thing that has ever happened to the Star Wars universe, aside from, you know, the first three.
Agreed.
The original three movies.
It has that mystery, the myth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it.
However, I will say Rogue One is probably my favorite Star Wars movie.
That is a great movie.
Yeah,
that is.
I will say this. I give Lucas a pass on turning it into a product, because I think maybe it's a combination of what Chris is talking about, where he just got burnt by Hollywood, because it wasn't really where, you know, he could survive maybe. But, you know, he took that entire $4 billion from selling Star Wars to Disney and put it into that education nonprofit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, he did.
And so, even though, my other issue with the prequels is the midichlorians, by the way, because the Force was my gateway to Qigong and martial arts and all these other things. But yeah, I'm like, okay, I spent all this money. I don't enjoy parts of it anymore, but I know that money went back to this education thing that he had going on. Yeah. So I think that he probably made those last three, or excuse me, the prequels, full well knowing that he was going to sell it. Maybe. And this was the product. He's like, okay, I'm going to aim this at kids. I'm going to make this nice, safe thing to make money, just like you're talking about Red Pill, but with the intention of the money's going to go over here. And so that became his purpose, was the money for that education venture, and not the spirit of the original films.
So the other thing with Luke, what was the other thing I was going to mention? There was something along the way I was going to mention here about the films and Lucas. Yep, I forgot.
Rogue Squadron, Mandalorian.
He's really Flannel Man.
He does look like Flannel Man.
And you know,
I know what it was. What was it? Go ahead, Red Pill.
Go ahead. I don't have an issue with the whole midichlorian stuff, and he feeling that he had to explain away some of the things about the Force. I mean, okay, you know, the midichlorians is like the Star Wars version of DMT.
Okay.
I have bigger issues. Like they don't like this is this big ass jigsaw puzzle that he never managed to fully fit. You know, like the idea of wait a minute. So Padme dies. She dies of a broken heart. It's like, oh my god, you know, like I think every woman that has been a mother felt so insulted by that. But anyway,
Yes.
and then the idea that wait a minute, so then that means that Leia never met her mother. And he says, well, you know, that she was confused. She never did meet her mother. So all these trying to make the things fit. Also, the idea that wait a minute, so Ben Kenobi was like in his early 50s, and he looks like he's 80 when he meets Luke Skywalker. Like, that Jesus, you know, life in Tatooine is harsh, man. You know, not to mention how old that Darth Vader also looks. That he was in his late 30s.
Right.
Like,
Right.
You know, like life in the service of the Empire is worse than having a continuous tour in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Hey, I mean, look at the Emperor. That guy's, you know, he's got to
Yeah,
moisturize.
Exactly. Yeah, there weren't good spas in Coruscant, you know, where they could go and have a facial.
So I think Chris in particular, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So someone had pointed out, so obviously Lucas, when he reimagined the first three movies and, you know, put in all the special effects and stuff, and then he kind of tried to get rid of those first versions. And those first versions won all kinds of awards for their effects because they were so cutting edge back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And making them unavailable is almost a slap to the face to the people who work so hard on that stuff to not allow anyone to be able to see it anymore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I this again goes like, you know, the personality of George Lucas and the things that he decides to do. I make no sense to me. And I think that, you know, I mean, if I was to speculate on why, I think it's because he lives in a bubble where he gets to do whatever he wants. And, you know, he had some aesthetic thing. Like, I know that from a filmmaking perspective. Like, I've been there myself, and I make, you know, weird underground movies. You know, there's like, you know, so there's a lot more space for things to be imperfect. But I understand this idea of like, there was a way you had it in your mind and you wanted it to be this way, and it didn't end up being that way on film. The thing is that most of the time, that's where the best stuff comes from. And if you're, you know, a good filmmaker, you know that. I think that what happened is that, you know, Lucas is kind of bitter because he didn't, you know, he isn't recognized as some like artsy fartsy, you know, avant-garde filmmaker, which I think he really wanted to be at heart. And, you know, I don't know, nobody's going to say no to him, and he wanted to do this, so he's going to do it. I think that's really all it was. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a money thing involved, but I really think that was like, you know, maybe there was a money thing involved, but it wouldn't make any sense, you know, money-wise. You could just have all of them, you know, more versions, the better, which is, I think, what they realize now. But yeah, it is a slap in the face to everything that everybody did. And, you know, from everything that I've heard, he's not a good director to work with. You know, allegedly you know, that Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, you know, I think it was Carrie Fisher that said that she felt like they were treated like trick talking meat on set, you know. Wow. So I don't know, but I've never met the guy, so I don't want to cast any, you know, I have no idea what he's really like. But I think that's like, that to me is, you know, that's that move was, it's like that power and nobody says no.
Yeah,
and he can do it.
It very much reminds me of Vince McMahon with the WWF and the WWE, that, you know, like, he doesn't really care what the fans want. He doesn't care what other people say. He's just going to do what he wants. And he is in an echo chamber and doesn't care.
Oh, yeah, I think that's totally true. I mean, you see that with, you know, people who are, I mean, you know, you see that even in politics, like anybody who gets into power, like, and is the sort of head of that, you know, whatever corporation or government or something. And if they're surrounded by yes people, it's different gray areas of despotism.
Yeah. I mean, the only time Vince actually cared what the fans wanted is when the company almost went out of business in the late 90s.
Right. Yes, exactly. No, it's totally true. And, I think you can see, I mean, you can see that. And I think the way that some of these, these personalities, either being, directors or, heads of, corporations, how they present themselves, if they want to get in front of the camera, particularly. And I think that to some degree, even though Lucas plays a little bit of an introvert, I think he likes people coming to him as the master filmmaker and asking him questions.
Sure.
Oh, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, he made something that is, one of the top things in movies ever, like there's
sure.
he doesn't
arguably created like a new quasi a mythos for an entire generation.
Yeah, a new religion,
Yeah,
basically it's the religion for the 21st century, whether we like it or not. But people will remember it for that, but not for being, like you said, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I think that unfortunately that title will be given to Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, who did, he did his movies, E.T. and whatever, the movies that made a lot of money in the box office. But also then, he did Schindler's List, and that's when people say, "Oh hell, this guy can also do adult stuff too." and he, nobody says no to Spielberg.
Yeah, Lucas forever lives in the shadow, I think.
And when you look at Star Wars, what Lucas did, that's myth making. And when you look at Star Trek, that was more like inspiration. That inspired technology. Star Wars didn't inspire technology; it inspired art and mythology.
Right. Well, I think you pointed it out. I mean, the Joseph Campbell, hero's journey, connection with Lucas. He was looking backward. He was not looking forward. So he was looking backward toward, myth, to set up some sort of, whatever the utopia or whatever the space that he was setting up, which wasn't a utopia. But Roddenberry was looking forward. I mean, he was a futurist. Yeah. He was also, part of the Nine cult.
Yeah, I forgot about that thing.
Yeah, remind me what the Nine is. I always forget this, and I'm sure there's people out there who don't know what it is.
All right, so if you want to look for this, I think it's out there. I did a show. Me and Recluse did a show on the Nine a little while ago, which we sort of went into this. If you want to find it out there, so the Nine is in 1950s. Andrija Puharich. People, maybe you guys are familiar with Andrija Puharich. So he was this guy who was working for the government, a scientist. He wrote this book on psychedelic mushrooms. He was very into ideas of consciousness and altered consciousness, and he was involved in that whole night, after World War II, 1950s, 1960s, not specifically MK Ultra, but in that sphere project, Artichoke. And if people are not familiar with those what basically this is using substances, psychedelic substances, to try to control people, do mind control. Very much weaponized. But Puharich was a wacky kind of mystic too. And so he met this this Swami, this guy who was named Dr. Vinod. He met him at a sort of it was some sort of I think in the New York area, it might have been in New York City. It was at in the really upper crust social circles, one of those parties there, but also a lot of the people there were kind of interested in occult revivalism to some degree. And so he met this guy Vinod, and he went with Vinod to his compound in New Hampshire, where the Round Table Group, which is the name of this group where he was doing research, and Vinod. Well, there were two instances. The first instance was just Puharich and his assistant. Vinod channeled these entities called the Nine, and they equated themselves to being, they're sort of like a little bit like Ashtar Command. They're like, and I think Ashtar actually ends up in the whole weird story of the Nine, merging with them at some point later. So there are these 9 entities that essentially say they're communicating through Vinod to help, push man forward to, it's the next horizon of, new humanity and all that stuff. And so what happens is that about a year later, he has the seance with Vinod again, with all of these like really prominent people like the Astors, the guy who founded Bell Helicopter, Arthur Young. So like these really prominent people in, old blue blood money and stuff like that. And they have a seance, and the 9 come again, and they say that, the 9 people that are there as part of the seance are going to be their emissaries on Earth. And, all this really sort of like, futurists, kind of starseed, new age. I mean, all this stuff that I think we're all really familiar with now. And Roddenberry was there, and he's this completely gets, so this whole channeled seance that he was part of ends up becoming a big part of his sort of private life throughout the 60s and 70s. And even after Andrija Puharich started this, like the 9 being channeled ended up happening through several other people. Kind of gets sketchier and sketchier the more you look into it. But this was something that, because it has this history that, it keeps on going. And then I feel like it ends up being involved with like, not the Process Church, but something else. Like it's really like these sketchy intersections of the 9 with all this other stuff. Another good thing to read about too is if you want, you can read Peter Levenda's book. Was it called Sinister Forces, the 9? He talks about this and sort of the tendrils of the 9 and how they go out into all these different parts of early government and particularly, the CIA stuff, how they're people experimenting on things and stuff, experimenting on people, MK Ultra type stuff. Anyway, so that seriously influenced Roddenberry, and you ended up seeing this whole mythos of the 9 and these sort of channeled discarnate entities, beings in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where they have these crystals that allow them to channel these discarnate entities that exist in this sort of non-space in a wormhole. It's like completely the exact same thing as the 9. Really interesting stuff. But that was actually a big part of Roddenberry and a big like core foundation for his sort of, his worldview as he was building Star Trek.
And it's interesting because he had such an effect on, as I said, our technological progression
completely.
And stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, two things that I would like to say is that one, back in 2012, when I went to the first Paradigm Symposium in Minneapolis, one of the speakers was this guy, Dan Madsen, who was the guy who founded the first official Star Trek fan club and also the first official Star Wars fan. I mean, he was kind of like the first guy who really got serious about fan clubs of sci-fi television programs, and he got like the at first who's the is it Columbia, the one that owns the rights for Star Trek?
Paramount.
Okay. At first, Paramount would sue the guy, but then when they realized, he's legitimate, fan of the show, they gave him the rights to continue doing so. Anyway, I took the opportunity to ask him the question about this mythology of Gene Roddenberry being influenced by this channel material, being in contact with the 9, and that was the basis for Star Trek. And this is someone who actually knew Gene Roddenberry and knew him very well. You know, he was a friend, a personal friend of Gene Roddenberry. And according to Dan Matson, he felt that there was nothing to the story, that it was a cool story, but he didn't believe that it was, based on real facts, Nevertheless, he said that Roddenberry was very interested in the UFO phenomenon and UFO stories. So there's that. I'm not saying that the 9 is complete bogus. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I don't think we have to be very careful and take it for granted. Oh yeah, that was the basis for.
Oh sure.
We don't know. Now, another thing that I wanted to add is that this idea about 9 individuals or 9 entities that were working behind the shadows, trying to influence human culture for the benefit of mankind or whatever. This is something that I read for the first time in this book, Morning of the Magicians. That was a very, very important book back in the 1960s. It was one of the first books that kind of almost kickstarted the counterculture movement.
It did, yeah, completely.
Unfortunately, not a lot of people know the book or haven't bothered to read it. You should try to pick a copy. And in the first chapter, I think, of the book, they talk about the idea of the 9 unknown,
unknown.
The concept of thousands of years in the past in India, there was this king who got into a bloody conflict with another nation, and he got so horrified about war, and violence that he vowed to try to eradicate war and violence from the world. And then there's all this mythology of all this secret knowledge that has been gathered and maintained for thousands and thousands of years by these secret society of 9 individuals. These weren't aliens or immortal beings. Supposedly they were replaced after they grew old and died.
Right.
And each of these individuals, supposedly, according to the legend, hold or held one particular book of forbidden knowledge that if it fell in the wrong hands, it could probably anyone would be able to control the world. And one book was about space travel, and the other book was about telepathy, and the other book was about I don't know, anti-aging technologies or whatever, things like that. There was even one book about economics or propaganda, which obviously in the 1960s, after the end of World War, and seeing the things that the Nazis were able to do, the idea of the power of influencing the masses, is something that we really need to take into account, especially nowadays, that it really feels like fascism is returning, not just to the United States, but in other places in the world. But there's that, all these ideas about secret societies, about the ascended masters, and this is obviously all this is has its roots in theosophy. Madame Blavatsky and all that jazz. That people in UFO culture need to take this into account. The idea that sometimes many of these ideas that they think that originated in from tales of contactees or whatever, they actually harken back to way before that. The many things that George Adamski said that allegedly the people from Venus told him. No, actually the guy borrowed it from old theosophy books that were written in the late 19th century.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if anybody hasn't sort of traced most, if not, I'm not saying all, but a lot of the current the tropes of para-weird as it exists today, it all goes back. I mean, that's where you can trace it back to theosophy and stuff going on around that. And I would be interested in more. It's one of the things that I'm personally doing because of this. There's this particular line of masters that I know I'm familiar with because my family ended up following them. My mother and father or hippies that followed this sort of obscure master. And there's a lineage that goes back to about that time too, or much further. Talks about similar things, and I really would be interested to if there are more people that could kind of trace back when like that the rise of a lot of these different tropes, or what are now tropes, around that time, like the mid 1800s. It's very interesting because I don't think it was just Blavatsky, bringing this stuff or cribbing this stuff from whomever. It's because you get the similar thing happening with Gurdjieff. After that, it's not that we necessarily shouldn't look forward, but it's good to look back too. And I think that there's a lot that hasn't been kind of explored about that area, and what was happening and sort of how it's influenced what's going on now, and the people that were involved too.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because it sort of doesn't matter if that stuff was based on anything real. It had a real impact on society.
Oh, yeah, Completely. It did. And that actually makes me think, it's funny because if you think about it, at least because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, it's circuitous in some ways if you're thinking about the logic of it, like if there are indeed masters that are sort of controlling things, the best way to do that really would be these sort of little subtle pushes, not, great big, enormous earthquakes and, things coming from the sky. These think of like the butterfly, the butterfly effect or the whisper in the ear.
Vallee's control system.
Right. And these things keep on expanding until like if you trace back stuff, things, these ideas, these occult ideas, and how, we've seen recently in the past, 4 years, how a lot of these occult ideas have now integrated themselves into politics, which is bananas. How did we get here? Well, let's trace it back. That's something that I'm always interested in doing.
Yeah, exactly. Narratives are so powerful. They can, shape and change the course of history. Take, for example, what happened in the 17th century when in Europe there were all these rumors about the secret society. They called themselves the Rosicrucians.
Right.
And they were said that they were going to manifest into the world and they were going to bring about a new change. And there were a lot of people saying, well, this is a hoax, but there were a lot of other people, very, very intelligent people that felt inspired by that. And then people like, Francis Bacon wrote the book, The New Atlantis, which was read by pretty much all the people who were involved in the American Revolution. And the idea, yes, let's build this utopia. Let's build this world in which we will be freed from the shackles of not only the tyranny of kings, the tyranny of monarchies, but also the tyranny of the church. Yeah. And let's build it in a new place. And what is the new place? Well, it's America, the new continent. Yeah. And that was the mythology that brought about the American experiment that is still unfolding. Now, unfortunately, it seems as if the American people are choosing now other types of narratives that are much more detrimental now with the idea of QAnon getting more power, which is bananas, even after Trump was defeated. But it seems like it almost feels like Trump is not only not going anywhere, but it's getting more power than ever. And I'm sorry of bringing about things about modern politics in this esoteric discussion, but this is one example on which esotericism and conspiracy theory and politics get intermingled.
Yes,
It's true.
Yeah,
A good book to read on that is Gary Lockman's Dark Star Rising.
yeah, and
Is
I had him on the show for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can even, there's another, I remember he's either, I forget if it was somebody that I was, a podcast I was listening to or whatever. Anyway, there was somebody that was talking recently about sort of a similar sort of model that we're talking about here, like theosophy or, having this influence or, or a particular book or, sorry, or Bacon's Atlantis. But, the whole idea that John Dee and his engagement with these with Enochian magic is essentially responsible for the British Empire and everything subsequent from
yes.
that. Yeah.
Right.
Fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't remember that guy's name.
Yeah, I think he might have been somebody you interviewed.
Yeah, I definitely had him on. I did not have him on, so I wanted to do a long interview with him because that book is like 500 pages long.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to do an hour. And I was like, so what, the first chapter?
Yeah, right.
Louvre, is that his name?
Yeah, it's Jason Louvre.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like I've heard other people say that. Yeah, but he had his book, the something of angels, I think.
Yes,
it was.
It is a very, very good book. It is an excellent piece of work. I wasn't all that thrilled with talking to him. Like, I think the interview went fine, but he was just not, like, he didn't seem like he cared. So I was like, well, this is disappointing.
It's too bad.
Interesting. Yeah. He's being invited with, he's a friend of Duncan Trussell, I think. And he even appeared in that wacko, very, very good TV series that Duncan did with Pendleton Ward.
Oh, yes, that was fantastic.
That created Adventure Time. Yeah. What's the name? Midnight
Gospel.
Midnight Gospel, exactly. And Jason Love is featured in one of those episodes.
I think Jason was he was the guy behind Disinfo he was running Disinfo for a while, wasn't he? Or am I wrong?
I don't know.
I think so, yeah. And he has another esoteric website whose name escapes me right now.
Yeah.
He had something called magick.me at one point, which was like basic, learn about actual magic type of stuff.
Oh, yeah. He that website, whose name I can't recall right now. The first thing you can do is you get a free book about chaos magic.
Yes. Yeah, like I said, I was just a little disappointed he wasn't more into talking about all this stuff. He just wanted to make it a quick interview, and I was like, but there's so much good stuff here,
Yeah.
Right. That's a pity.
But there was something else I was just going to say, and I've lost it. All right. Well, so we were talking about Star Trek or Star Wars and the concept of mystery. And to me, that's the thing that draws me into fiction is mystery. Like,
right.
And I think it's part of the reason that things like The X-Files, Twin Peaks, Lost, these shows got so big because they gave you this grand mystery. And whether or not you liked how they resolved those mysteries, it doesn't matter. It was the mystery that drew you in,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Fringe, same thing.
Yeah. Right now, one of the best things that you can find for streaming is Netflix Katla. It's a nice, short, limited series that was produced in Iceland. And I actually wrote an article about it for the Daily Grail because I was really captivated by how they managed to weave a very original story with all these ancient folklore about, what they call the Huldufolk, the hidden people, the fairies, the fey folk, and also the concept of the changelings. The moment that I saw the word changelings, I had to pause my Netflix and I could go and go into log into our group that you have on Slack and I have to page our friend Joshua Koch, and I say, Josh, you need to check this out, pronto. And he did, and actually he loved it as much as I did.
Yeah,
and he actually gave me a lot of interesting pointers about the story and about its connections with the fairy folklore roots that I actually didn't see, because when it comes to the Fae, Josh, you're man.
Yes, yeah, and I loved that. I watched that. It was addictive to watch. I'm like, I want to know where this is going. I'm not sure I totally loved the explanation they kind of squeezed in.
Oh, yeah. The moment that I saw, this is like, it's kind of like, midichlorian. This is the Icelandic midichlorians.
But that's like such a minor gripe for such a great series. Like that minor sort of materialistic thing that they had to throw in there to explain everything, and it's kind of like, yeah, whatever. It was still great,
Yeah, and to Josh, and this is something, he didn't feel that it was materialistic at all. He said, no. They tried to gave it a veiled, scientific veneer, but it was magic. The reason why the story. I'm not going to spoil it.
Yeah, don't spoil it at all.
But the quote unquote explanation was totally 100% magical. Because
true.
It's like almost like taken out of a Lovecraftian novel.
Yeah,
something like that.
Mm-hmm. And that's Katla for anyone who wants to look it up on Netflix. And it's Icelandic. It is dubbed in English as well as having the original Icelandic there. So if you don't like reading subtitles, you can just watch the dubbed one, like I did.
Yeah, I think that Josh liked the dubbing because it was actually made by the same actors, okay. The Icelandic actors, their English is so good that they actually managed to, dub their parts.
Oh, nice. I didn't know that. But yeah, I loved that. That's the last thing I've watched that I really loved.
Yeah.
So
we watched the Sasquatch documentary from Hulu, the 3-part. I think we mentioned it briefly at one other point.
Yeah, but how is it?
It was all right. They treat the actual Sasquatch aspect of it very loosely, and it doesn't get much attention because by the end of it, of course, they figure out a lot more of what happened, who killed these guys, and it's a lot about California and the marijuana scene that grew up there over the years and the people that were involved. There is even a person that comes into play named Bigfoot Gary.
Huh.
And yes, he's one of these guys that everybody thinks is like, top of the roost, I guess, in the area. And so the guy who's conducting this investigation that heard the story starts to even wonder, like, well, were they just talking about Bigfoot Gary killing those guys? Or was it Bigfoot Sasquatch, So there's some very interesting characters in it, but, they've got Bob Gimlin in there briefly a couple of times. The guy that always claims that he was Patty, that is way too small to be Patty. Jeff Meldrum's in there a couple of times, and then a couple of other. They're not names I recognized anywhere, but it's a couple that they get into, like, even they bicker with each other over flesh and blood versus portals and things like that. And like, you guys should have had Ron Moorhead in here, if you want to have something cool like that, but. That's more treated as like, here's a fun aside about Bigfoot. Now back to the murder mystery.
Because the murder mystery has got to do with the like weed scene up there, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, it's all tied into the marijuana scene and money and ownership and things like that. So, but it was good to see some of those folks. He was very respectful with Bob Gimlin. there was never any, trying to make any of these people look bad. And at the end of it, he even says, I don't believe in Sasquatch, but I believe that these people believe they have experienced something that they think is Sasquatch. And so I was like, okay, that's fair. He wasn't trying to insult anybody. But, it's only 3 episodes. So if you want something kind of fun to watch and have a good distraction, check it out. But, it'll go by fast, and it was entertaining. Certainly all the different characters that were there, that they were kind of the back to earth, back to nature movement. And then that evolved into like Hell's Angels moving into the area.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And you had the hippies from the back to earth movement becoming very militarized.
Yeah.
Alongside the Hells Angels. And so you had all these like very nice people that then turned into
I've seen that. The hippies go over pretty easy. I don't know, I'm probably that's like the teenage punk rock me who's like, hate the hippies. Because my parents are hippies, of course.
Well,
of course.
That's why Jacques Vallee had to sell his property in California.
Yeah.
He had his retreat called Spring Hill. And his books, Forbidden Science, these journals, he talks about all these experiments he tried to conduct there in order to try to elicit or manifest some kind of like UFO or paranormal activity. He even built like a medieval tower there, on the top of the tower he put all his esoteric books, books about alchemy, books about, fairies and all that, very, very old books, and he got mixed results. I think that his wife is the one who actually managed to see a couple of things at one time. But yeah, they had to sell it because the people were trespassing and they were sort of growing weed inside his property, and he got like freaked out and bothered by that and said, well, this is too much of a hassle, I guess, and they sold it, and that's it. But listen about this idea of Bigfoot and the marijuana thing reminded me about that old story about this logger Albert Ostman, who claimed that he had been kidnapped by a Bigfoot, and that he managed to spend a few days trapped with a family of Sasquatch. The male, the female, and 2 younger Bigfoots.
That's right.
And that the way that he managed to escape was by offering snuff to the big male. Yeah. And the big male, swallowed the whole thing out of his snuff tin can. And the poor thing began to howl in pain and got, and just imagine if that had happened, not in the I think it would happen in the 1930s or something like that. But imagine if it instead had happened in the 2020, and instead of offering Bigfoot a can of snuff, you offered him a joint.
Right.
I don't know what would have happened. You offer Bigfoot a doobie.
Right. Maybe that's the guy's the reason why Bigfoot has been trying to either kill us or hide from us since then. It's like, what's this poison this human gave him? If he gave him something better, if he had given him a joint.
Yeah, exactly.
And that view of, I believe they saw something, but I don't believe in Bigfoot. I'm okay with that. I mean, I think there's too many experiences from too many people, cross culture, cross time, that you can't dismiss it. You can't say, well, I don't know if people are experiencing something, but it doesn't tell us what it is, especially when these people and time periods, these different cultures name it different things. It's like, okay, so we're supposed to believe it's one thing over another. Even Bigfoot was, only Bigfoot recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have various cultures that see it as a spiritual thing, others as a flesh and blood thing, just like we talk about now. You know, so there is something that people are experiencing that resembles a flesh and blood ape in the woods. Now, it doesn't mean it's a flesh and blood ape in the woods. It just means that there is an actual phenomena that fits this description, because the likelihood of everybody lying over multiple cultures throughout time seems far more unlikely than there's an actual phenomena that people are experiencing. And that goes for all of it. UFOs, ghosts, the whole 9 yards.
Well, and it is amazing just how ubiquitous the, kind of wild man archetype is, because we'll even say like, okay, Asian cultures have dragons, European cultures have dragons, but they really don't look alike.
No.
And it's not like that's everywhere, but forest ape, is pretty much everywhere has that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do. One thing that I like that came out of Josh and Tim's research is the idea that somehow the myth of the wild man gets wilder the more civilized we become. That like we have the wildest Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him. But if you go back in time, it becomes less wild and more like, I think he's either me or somebody else, but it occurred to me, I even thought of the idea of Merlin as the wild man, being trapped in the tree, but living, that is time backwards.
Yes, that is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely.
And we can go back to our discussion about Star Wars. That scene in which Ben saves Luke from the Sand People.
Yep.
And it almost struck me the way that he walks with his cloak.
Yes.
He almost moves like he's Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And you don't see his face. And you only see like this hood. The pointy hood, by the way, and he's doing this yell, this almost like an animal, like a beast, and that's when he finds Luke, then it is revealed as actually it's kind of like a wild man too. Even his uncle calls him, that guy is crazy. Lives all alone.
Crazy old hermit.
Yeah, no,
crazy old hermit. Yeah,
that is definitely the wild man archetype.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, but you're dead on that.
I know. I want to see that as an article in the next Bigfoot, anthology that Josh curates. Obi-Wan as Bigfoot.
Right.
I wonder if anyone's presented that to Josh, since Josh is such a huge Star Wars guy. You listening, Josh?
Maybe eluded him. Yeah.
Yeah. We should definitely do that if nobody has. That needs to go into the Slack.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, because everybody thinks of Chewbacca. That's a Bigfoot in the Star Wars universe. And there's even this short story, this like comic book in the Millennium Falcon somehow manages to crash into our world in the 19th century, and Han Solo is killed. And then Chewbacca is the one that is roaming the Pacific forest, and that's all the legends of Bigfoot.
Oh, I've read that. Yes, it's somebody brought that up the other day. It was a question if Star Wars had Earth within its continuity or whatever, and someone brought that story up. It's like, well, it was a side story, like an alternate universe kind of thing, but. And dies, and Chewbacca stuck on Earth. Thought that was interesting. Yeah, it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And Chewie's like the everyman in Star Wars too, which I always thought was funny. He's the one that's not really an archetype compared to the other characters, or at least a simplified. Han as the pirate, the princess, the hero, the old wizard. Chewie's like the normal guy just hanging out for the ride.
Yeah, I guess he is.
He doesn't have a reason to be there. He was like,
that's
I was
true.
Out with my friend.
Interesting. All right. Does anyone else have anything they want to bring up before we conclude this?
Nope.
I can't think of anything.
All right. Well, I thank you all for doing this. Red Pill, do you feel a little better?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right.
Much
Excellent.
better. Thank
Me
you,
too.
guys.
Good.
And tell people where we can find you. Red Pill, why don't you start?
Well, you can find me at the Daily Grail, www.dailygrail.com, where you can find my articles, the articles written by Greg Taylor, news every day. And if you can support us on Patreon, we will greatly appreciate it. You can also find my own personal website, absurdbydesign.com, which you can see the gallery of illustrations that I've created over the years, also book designs, things like that, and also links to my occasional, podcast appearances such as this one.
Okay. Chris?
Go to brightrectangle.com or go to Red Pill Junkie's site and get a t-shirt instead.
And Saxon, you're at least active on our Discord here and there.
Yeah, I'm active on the Discord now and then. And, if you happen to pop on the Discord and have a question you want to shoot my way, feel free to.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
In 2019, the first Strange Realities Conference took place in Nashville, Tennessee. The pandemic and turmoil the following year could not stop 2020's conference from thriving in cyberspace as a live streaming event. Now, for 2021, the third annual Strange Realities Conference will combine these worlds into a paranormal hybrid event, live in person in Nashville and streaming online. Join us in exploring just how truly strange our reality can be with an interdimensional lineup of speakers presenting unique and intellectual perspectives on magic, mysteries, and the paranormal.
Featuring Alan Greenfield, Dr. J. Michael Bennett, a.k.a. Dr. Future, Tim Banal, Seriah Ascaf, Dr. Stephen Finley, Aaron Gullius, Amy Pachula, Brent Rains, Chris Ernst, Heather Mosier, Michael Hughes, Jose Herrera, Joshua Cutchin, Kiki Dombrowski, Nathan Isaac, P.D. Newman, Steven Snyder, a.k.a. Recluse, David Metcalf, Timothy Renner, Steve Stockton, and Ren Collier. Tickets available at strangerealitiesconference.com.
It's going to be amazing.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons for their support. It's all of you that keeps this show going. I particularly want to give a shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Infra Man, Eric Hervin, Tim, Andrew Nichols, The 100th Monkey Project, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Base FRQ, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Layla Malden, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Matthew Sproul, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, William Lovelace, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very much for your support. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.